She bought a forgotten $300 house, but the walls were hiding a family secret from 51 years ago. Marlene Kade thought she was buying a simple abandoned home in a quiet Pennsylvania town. But when she stepped inside, she found a life frozen in time. Untouched rooms, missing records, and clues that someone had carefully hidden for decades. The deeper she looked, the more she realized the house was waiting for someone to uncover what happened. If you found a secret hidden in an old house, would you keep searching or walk away? The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and damp paper. It was the kind of room that had seen too many small decisions, county decisions, the kind that never made the news, folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, a long table at the front, a man with a microphone that didn't quite work unless he leaned into it. Marlene Kade sat in the third row from the back. She hadn't planned to be there. The flyer had been taped to the window of the laundromat. White paper, black ink. County property auction. She had read it while waiting for her clothes to dry, more out of habit than interest. She didn't usually go anywhere she didn't have to. But something about the list of addresses had held her there. Not the prices, not even the word auction. Just the number of houses. Too many. The man at the front cleared his throat and tapped the microphone again. It crackled, then steadied. "We'll continue with parcel 43, he said, without looking up. Vacant lot, eastern edge, opening at 500. A few hands went up. Quiet bids, routine. The kind of back and forth that felt practiced, almost polite. Marlene watched without really watching. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers folded into each other. The skin along her knuckles had thinned over the years, veins showing more than they used to. She noticed things like that now. Small changes, quiet shifts. The man sold the lot quickly, then another, and another. It all blurred together. Numbers, addresses, voices that didn't carry much weight. Until the room changed. It wasn't loud. No one spoke differently. No one stood up. But something tightened. The auctioneer glanced down at his sheet, paused just a second longer than before. Next, he said, "Parcel 57, residential structure, County Road 12. A chair creaked somewhere behind Marlene. She turned her head slightly. A man in a dark jacket, mid-60s, maybe older, had pushed his chair back. Not suddenly, just enough to stand. He didn't look at anyone as he stepped into the aisle. He walked out. No one stopped him. No one asked why. Marlene watched the door close behind him, then turned back to the front. Opening bid, the auctioneer continued, his voice flatter now. $300. No one moved. Not a glance. Not a shift. Not even the quiet rustle of someone checking their notes. It was the first time all morning the room had gone still. Marlene felt it settle around her. That stillness. She didn't know the address, didn't recognize the road. But she felt something in the way the others didn't respond. Like they had already made a decision. Like this wasn't a question. The auctioneer waited. He looked up, scanning the room, but not really expecting anything. 300, he repeated. Silence. Marlene shifted in her chair. She hadn't come to buy anything. Her apartment lease was steady. Small, but enough. The rent was manageable. The windows faced a parking lot, but they let in light in the mornings if she stood at the right angle. She didn't need a house. Didn't need a project. Didn't need more. But the number stayed with her, 300. Less than she had paid for her husband's last recliner. She thought of that chair. Still sitting in the corner of her apartment. The indentation, where he used to sit, hadn't fully disappeared. She hadn't moved it, didn't see the point. The auctioneer shifted his weight. "Any bids?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Marlene looked around. The men in the front row stared at the table. One of them adjusted his sleeve, careful not to look up. A woman near the wall flipped through a folder she wasn't reading. No one wanted it. That much was clear. But no one said why. Marlene's hand moved before she had time to think about it. Just a small motion. Up. Then still. The auctioneer blinked. He straightened slightly, as if he hadn't expected to see anything at all. 300, he said, pointing toward her. "We have 300. A few heads turned now. Not many. Just enough for her to feel it. The weight of being seen. "Any advance?" he asked, scanning the room again. Nothing. No hesitation. No counter. Just that same quiet refusal. Going once. Marlene felt her hand lower slowly back into her lap. Her heartbeat wasn't fast. Not really. Just present. Going twice. The man in the front row shifted again, but didn't look up, sold. The gavel tapped once against the table, soft, final. And just like that, it was done. Marlene exhaled, though she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. The room moved on almost immediately. "Next parcel," the auctioneer said, already reading the next line. Voices returned. Chairs creaked. Pens scratched against paper, as if nothing had happened. But Marlene stayed still for a moment longer. $300. For a house. She wasn't sure what she had just bought, only that no one else wanted it, and that, somehow, unsettled her more than the price ever could. The paperwork took less than 20 minutes. A clerk with tired eyes slid forms across the table without much conversation. Marlene signed where she was told, initialed twice, wrote her name slowly, the way she always did, careful even when no one was watching. "Keys'll be in the lockbox," the clerk said, not looking up. "Address is on the sheet." Marlene nodded. No congratulations, no small talk. Just the quiet closing of a transaction no one seemed interested in finishing. It took her nearly an hour to find the place. County Road 12 wasn't a road so much as a long, narrow stretch of cracked asphalt that wandered through what used to be something busier. Old steel towns had a way of thinning out like that. Buildings left behind. Businesses that never reopened. Streets that led somewhere once, and then didn't. She drove slowly. Windows down. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain that had passed through something industrial years ago and never quite let go of it. The house appeared almost suddenly. No sign. No fence. Just a break in the line of overgrown trees, and then there it was. Small. 2 stories. The paint had long since faded into something between gray and yellow. The front steps sagged slightly to one side, but not enough to collapse. Not yet. It didn't look abandoned in the way she expected. It looked paused. Marlene turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. The silence settled quickly. No passing cars, no distant voices, just the soft ticking of the engine cooling beneath the hood. She reached for the paper on the passenger seat, checked the address again. This was it. She stepped out of the car. The gravel under her shoes crunched louder than it should have. The sound carried. It made her aware of how still everything else was. The lockbox hung from the front door handle, slightly rusted at the edges. She entered the code the clerk had written down. The latch clicked open without resistance. Inside, a single key. Cold. Heavier than she expected. Marlene hesitated before unlocking the door. Not out of fear. Just a pause. Then she turned it. The door opened with a low, steady creak. The smell came first. Not rot, not mildew. Something cleaner. Old soap, faint smoke, dust layered over both, but not strong enough to erase them. She stepped inside. The air felt different immediately. Closed in, but not stale. Like a room that had been sealed rather than left. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The living room sat directly ahead, a couch against the far wall, covered in a thin film of dust, but otherwise intact. A small table beside it, with a book still resting open, its pages curled slightly at the edges. Marlene didn't touch it. Not yet. She moved further in, each step deliberate, measured. The floorboards held. No creaks sharp enough to suggest damage, just the soft complaint of wood that hadn't carried weight in a long time. To the right, the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. A pot sat on the stove, not burnt, not crusted over, just there. The lid tilted slightly, as if someone had set it down in the middle of something and never came back to finish it. The sink held a single glass, clear, upright, not tipped, not broken. Beside it, a dish towel folded neatly over the edge. Marlene felt something shift in her chest, not fear, something quieter than that. She walked over to the wall. A calendar hung just above a small wooden table. October 1972. The page hadn't been turned. One date, mid-month, circled in blue ink. No note beside it, no explanation, just the circle. Marlene reached out and touched the edge of the paper. It was dry, fragile, but still holding. She let her hand fall back to her side. Behind her, near the entrance, a coat hung on a hook by the door. Dark wool, worn at the cuffs. It didn't sway when she passed it. The air wasn't moving. Nothing was. She turned slowly, taking it all in. The order of it. The stillness. Not the kind that comes after neglect. The kind that comes after interruption. Marlene stepped back into the living room. The open book on the table drew her attention again. This time she leaned closer. The print was small. A novel, maybe. She didn't recognize the title. A bookmark sat halfway through. A receipt, folded once. She didn't unfold it. Didn't move it. Something about the room made her hesitate, as if touching anything would change it. Break it. She straightened again and looked toward the hallway. A narrow corridor leading deeper into the house. The light didn't reach very far, but she could see enough to know the rest of the house would be the same. Waiting. Not empty. Just unfinished. Marlene stood there a long moment, listening. There were no sounds. Not even the kind a house usually makes. No settling wood. No distant pipes. Nothing. Just her own breathing. Slow, measured, present. She walked back to the front door and left it open behind her. Not for light. For something else. She couldn't quite name it. Outside, the air felt different again. Wider. She stood on the porch and looked back into the house. From there, it almost looked normal. Just another place someone had lived. But she knew better now. This wasn't a house someone had left behind. This was a house someone had stepped away from and never returned to. And whatever had happened in that moment had stayed, right where they left it. Marlene closed the front door gently behind her. The latch clicked into place with a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been. She stood there on the porch a moment longer, her hand still resting on the handle, as if expecting something inside to shift now that she had left. Nothing did. The house remained still. She stepped down onto the gravel and turned slowly toward the road. From this angle, she could see the rest of the street. 3 houses to the left, 2 to the right, all standing, all intact. But something about them felt held back, like they were watching without wanting to be seen doing it. The nearest house across the road had curtains drawn halfway across the front window, not closed, not open, just enough to block a clear view inside. As Marlene looked, the fabric moved. Not much, just a slight shift. Like someone had let go of it too quickly. She didn't react, just stood there, taking it in. Then she walked back to her car. She drove into town about 15 minutes later. The road curved back toward what passed for a main street, one long strip of brick buildings and faded signage, a hardware store, a diner with 2 cars parked out front, a grocery store with a bell on the door that rang when she stepped inside. The air in the store was cooler. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Marlene picked up a basket and moved slowly down the aisles, more out of habit than necessity. Bread, eggs, a small carton of milk, things she knew she'd need if she stayed longer than an afternoon. She reached the counter and set the basket down. The cashier was a woman in her 50s, maybe older, hair pulled back tight, glasses low on her nose. She rang the items up without looking up. "New around here?" the woman asked. Her tone wasn't unfriendly. "Just careful." Marlene nodded. "Just bought a place out on County Road 12. The scanner stopped mid-beep. The woman's hand paused on the carton of milk. For a second, nothing moved. Then she finished scanning, set the milk aside, and reached for the next item. "Which place?" she asked. Marlene hesitated, just briefly. The small 2-story, yellow, I think, or it used to be. The woman didn't respond right away. She placed the bread into a bag, folded the top neatly. Her movements were steady, practiced, but slower now. "That house," she said finally, her voice quieter. Not a question. Marlene watched her. "Yes." The woman nodded once, almost to herself. Then she reached for the register drawer and pulled it open. "That'll be $12.43. Marlene handed her a 20. No further questions. No welcome. The bell rang again as someone entered behind her. A man in a heavy coat, despite the mild weather. He glanced at Marlene, then at the cashier. Something passed between them. Quick, unspoken. Marlene took her change and stepped aside. As she reached for the door, she heard the man speak under his breath. Did she say where? The cashier didn't answer. Or if she did, it was too quiet for Marlene to hear. She stopped at the diner next, not because she was hungry, just because she didn't want to go back yet. Inside, the air smelled of grease and coffee. A radio played softly somewhere in the back, an old station with songs that had outlived their time. She took a booth near the window, ordered coffee, black. The waitress brought it without much conversation, set it down with a nod, and walked away. Marlene wrapped her hands around the mug. Warm, solid, real. She stared out the window at the street. People moved here. Not many, but enough to remind her this place wasn't abandoned, just selective. A man sat down at the counter a few seats away, older, thin, his jacket hung loose on his shoulders. He glanced at her once, then again. Longer this time. "You're the one bought that place," he said. It wasn't a question. Marlene looked over at him. "I suppose I am." He nodded slowly, turned his coffee cup in his hands without lifting it. "That house wasn't empty," he said. Marlene didn't respond right away. He wasn't looking at her anymore, just at the counter. It was left alone. The words settled between them. Not dramatic, not emphasized, just stated. "What does that mean?" she asked. The man gave a small shrug. "Means folks stopped going near it. That's all." "That's all?" Marlene repeated. He finally looked at her again. There was something in his eyes. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to caution. "Some places," he said, "don't like being disturbed after a while." Marlene held his gaze. "Places don't decide that," she said. "No," he agreed. "People do." Silence stretched for a moment. Then he stood, leaving a few coins on the counter. "Take your time in there," he added, almost as an afterthought. "If you're going to stay." He didn't wait for a response, just walked out. The bell on the diner door rang softly behind him. Marlene turned back to her coffee. It had gone slightly cooler. She took a sip anyway. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. Faint. Distorted. Behind it, the street moved on like nothing had changed. But something had. She could feel it now. Not inside the house. Outside it. In the way people spoke. In the way they didn't. In the way the address seemed to close conversations before they even began. Marlene set the cup down, finished what she had left. Then she stood, gathered her things, and stepped back out into the afternoon light. The drive back felt shorter, the road quieter. As she turned onto County Road 12 again, the trees seemed to lean in a little closer than before. Watching. Waiting. The house came into view just as it had earlier. Still. Unchanged. But now, it didn't feel alone. Marlene parked the car and sat there a moment, her hands resting on the wheel. Across the street, the curtains moved again. Just slightly. She didn't look away this time, and neither did they. Marlene stayed in the car a few seconds longer than she needed to. The curtain across the street shifted once, then went still. No face appeared. No hand. Just fabric settling back into place like nothing had happened. She exhaled slowly and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched again under her shoes, sharp in the quiet. The same quiet as before, but it felt different now. Less empty, more aware. She unlocked the front door and went inside. The air hadn't changed. Still that faint mix of soap and smoke. Still that strange sense of something paused mid-motion. Marlene set her grocery bag down on the kitchen counter and stood there, hands resting lightly on the edge. She looked around. Not quickly, not like before. This time she let her eyes move slowly across the room. taking things in, comparing, measuring. She had spent most of her life working with her hands, stitching, cutting, matching edges that didn't always line up at first glance. Patterns had rules, and when something broke those rules, it showed. Even if no one else noticed. She reached for the drawer beside the sink and pulled it open. Utensils, forks, knives, spoons, all placed neatly into sections, but there were too many. She counted them without thinking. 6 forks, 6 knives, 6 spoons. She closed the drawer and moved to the cabinet above the counter. Plates stacked inside. Blue-rimmed, 5 in one stack, 3 in another, not even. She frowned slightly. It wasn't the number. It was the arrangement. People didn't stack dishes like that unless something interrupted them. She stepped back and turned toward the hallway. The light from the kitchen stretched partway down, fading into shadow the further it went. She walked slowly, her hand brushing lightly against the wall as she passed. The texture of the paint felt smooth, not peeling, not cracked. Someone had taken care of this place. The first door on the left opened into a small bathroom. Everything in place. Toothbrushes in a cup by the sink. 3 of them. One with bristles worn down at the edges. The other 2, stiff, barely used. She picked one up, held it between her fingers, then set it back exactly where it had been. Her reflection caught in the mirror above the sink. For a moment, she didn't recognize it. Then she did, and she looked away. Back into the hallway. Further down, another door. She pushed it open. A bedroom. The bed was made. Tight. Corners tucked in with care. A folded blanket at the foot. A dresser against the wall. One drawer slightly open. Marlene crossed the room and pulled it the rest of the way. Inside, clothes. Neatly folded, but older styles. Patterns that hadn't been worn in decades. She pressed her hand lightly on top of the stack. Dust rose, thin and slow in the air. Untouched. She closed the drawer again. Something about it bothered her. Not the age, the stillness, the way everything stayed exactly where it had been left. As if no one had come back to disturb even the smallest thing. She moved to the window and looked outside. Across the street, the curtains were still, but she could feel it again. That sense of being watched. Not aggressively, not openly, just quietly. She stepped away from the window. Back into the hallway. There was one more door at the end. She opened it. A smaller room. A child's room. The air felt different here. Lighter somehow, but also unfinished. A small bed sat against the wall. Covers pulled up halfway, like someone had gotten out of it in a hurry. A pair of small shoes sat neatly near the corner. Clean. Too clean. She crouched down beside them, ran her finger lightly along the edge. No dust, or barely any. She stood slowly. Her eyes moved across the room. Books on a low shelf. A toy truck on the floor. Everything in place, but nothing lived in. She stepped back into the hallway and leaned lightly against the wall. Her mind began to sort things, not emotionally, practically, like pieces of fabric laid out on a table. 3 toothbrushes. 1 worn, 2 untouched. Shoes that hadn't been used, clothes that hadn't been disturbed, dishes that didn't match in number. A calendar that stopped mid-month. A house that wasn't damaged, wasn't looted, wasn't abandoned in a hurry. She pushed off the wall and returned to the kitchen, opened one of the drawers near the table, found a small notepad, blank, and a pen beside it. She picked them up and sat down. The chair made a soft sound as she shifted her weight. Marlene placed the pad on the table, wrote slowly. 3. She paused. Then underneath it, toothbrushes. Then 1 used, 2 not. She stared at the words for a moment, then added more. Shoes, child, clean, dishes, uneven, calendar, October 1972, circled date. Her handwriting stayed steady, even, controlled. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't imagining. She was recording. The way she used to keep track of measurements, patterns, adjustments, because something here didn't fit. And when something didn't fit, there was always a reason. She set the pen down and leaned back slightly in the chair. The house creaked softly. Just once. Then quiet again. Marlene looked toward the hallway, then toward the front door, then back at the notes in front of her. This wasn't a place someone had left behind. It was a place someone had been forced to stop inside. Mid-step. Midday. Midlife. She closed the notebook. Not hard. Just enough. And placed it carefully beside her. Outside, the light had begun to shift. Afternoon settling into evening. The kind of light that made shadows stretch longer than they should. Marlene stood up slowly, walked to the front door, and locked it. This time, not because she was leaving, but because she knew she was staying. And whatever had happened here was still waiting to be understood. Marlene didn't sleep much that night. Not because she was afraid. The house didn't feel threatening. It felt suspended, like it was holding something in place. She lay on the couch in the living room, a thin blanket pulled over her, eyes open longer than they should have been. The silence pressed in, not loud, not sharp, but constant. No distant traffic, no hum of appliances, just stillness. Around 3 a.m, she got up, walked quietly into the kitchen, opened the cabinet again, counted the plates one more time. 5, then 3. She closed the door. She didn't need to count again. By morning, she had made up her mind. If the house wouldn't explain itself, then the records might. The county office sat in a low brick building just off the main road, the kind of place with a flag out front and a faded bench no one used anymore. Inside, it smelled like paper. Old paper. The kind that had been handled too many times and then not at all. Marlene stepped up to the counter. A man in a gray shirt sat behind it, reading glasses resting low on his nose. He looked up when she approached. "Help you?" he asked. Marlene nodded once. "I'm looking for records on a property. County Road 12. The man reached for a keyboard without much interest. "Parcel number?" She handed him the sheet from the auction. He typed slowly. The screen flickered. He leaned forward slightly, then paused. "What's the address?" he asked again, even though he had it in front of him. Marlene repeated it. He typed again. Clicked. Waited. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Finally, he turned the screen slightly toward himself, not toward her. "Halbrook property," he said. The name settled into the space between them. "Halbrook," Marlene repeated quietly. He nodded once. "Last registered owner, family residence." She waited. "That's it?" she asked. The man shifted in his chair. "There's not much else," he said. Marlene didn't move. "Not much else," she repeated. He clicked again, opened another window. Records stop around 1972, he added. No sale after that. No transfer. No lien closures. No death record? She asked. He shook his head. No relocation filing? Another shake. No probate? He hesitated. Then, nothing on file. Marlene watched him carefully. People don't just disappear from records, she said. The man didn't answer that directly. Sometimes paperwork gets delayed, he said instead, or lost. 50 years? She asked. That made him look up. Just for a second. Then back down. He cleared his throat. You might try the church registry, he said. Some families kept records there too. Marlene nodded. Which church? She asked. He gave her the name. Didn't meet her eyes again. The church sat at the edge of town. White paint. Small bell tower. The kind of place that had outlasted everything around it. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air felt cooler. Quieter than outside. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the front, worn smooth by years of use. Marlene stepped carefully down the aisle. A woman appeared from a side room, wiping her hands on a cloth. Can I help you? She asked. Marlene explained. The woman listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. We have records, she said. Older ones too. She led Marlene to a small office behind the sanctuary. A cabinet stood against the wall, filled with bound ledgers. The woman pulled one down, set it on the desk. Halbrook, she said, flipping through pages. That name's been here. Marlene stepped closer, watched as the woman turned page after page. Dates. Names, births, baptisms, marriages, funerals. Then, there, the woman said, tapping a line. Halbrook, a family entry. Marlene leaned in. 3 names, father, mother, child. Dates listed beside each. All ending the same year. No follow-up, no burial records, no notes. Just stopped. Is that all? Marlene asked. The woman frowned slightly. That's where it ends, she said. Ends how? Marlene pressed. The woman shook her head. It just stops. Marlene straightened. Her eyes moved across the page again, looking for anything she might have missed. There was nothing. No correction. No mark. No explanation. Just a blank space where something should have continued. Do you remember them? Marlene asked. The woman hesitated. Then, I was young. That's not what I asked. The woman looked at her then. Really looked. They were here, she said quietly. That's all I'll say. The cemetery sat behind the church, small, well kept. Rows of stones, some leaning slightly with age. Marlene walked slowly between them, reading names, dates. She found the Halbrook section, or what should have been. There was a space. 3 plots. Unmarked. Grass grown evenly across them. No stones, no names, nothing to say who belonged there. Marlene stood there a long time. Wind moved softly through the trees always behind her. Leaves shifting. A quiet sound. She looked down at the ground again. 3 spaces. Empty, but not unused. She could feel that much. Back at the car, she sat without starting the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. Still. The name stayed with her. Halbrook. A family that existed. Lived. Registered. Recorded. And then nothing. No ending. No departure. No trace. As if someone had taken a line of ink and simply stopped writing. Marlene exhaled slowly. then reached into her bag, pulled out the small notebook, opened it, wrote, Hallbrook family, records end 1972, church, same, cemetery, empty plots. She paused, then added, not gone. Removed. She closed the notebook, set it beside her, and finally started the car. The road back felt different now, not quieter, heavier. The house came into view again through the trees, waiting. Still, exactly as she had left it. Marlene parked, stepped out, and looked at it for a long moment before moving. This time, when she walked toward the door, she wasn't guessing anymore. She was following something, and whatever had been erased from the records had been left behind inside that house. She was certain of it. Marlene didn't go inside right away. She stood at the base of the porch, looking up at the front door like it might shift if she stared long enough. The late afternoon light stretched across the siding, catching the uneven patches in the paint. Nothing moved. Nothing ever moved. Except her. She stepped up onto the porch, unlocked the door, went in. The air greeted her the same way it had before. Still, faintly clean, unfinished. She closed the door behind her and set her bag down on the small table near the wall. Her notebook stayed in her hand this time. She didn't sit, didn't pause. Instead, she walked straight into the dining room. It was a small space just off the kitchen, a square table with 4 chairs. One of them pulled out slightly, as if someone had stood up from it and never pushed it back in. Marlene circled the table slowly. Her eyes moved over the walls. Nothing obvious at first, just faded wallpaper, a repeating floral pattern, slightly misaligned near the corner. She stepped closer. Not because it looked wrong, because it felt wrong. Her fingers traced along the seam where 2 strips met. There. A slight shift, barely noticeable, but enough. She leaned in closer, studying the pattern. The flowers didn't match. Not exactly. One strip sat just a fraction lower than the other, a mistake too small for most people to notice. But not for her. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, then knocked lightly. Solid. She moved her hand a few inches to the left. Knocked again. A different sound. Not loud, not obvious, but thinner. Hollow. Marlene froze. Her hand stayed where it was. She knocked again. Same result. She stepped back slowly, her eyes fixed on that section of wall. The room seemed quieter now. Or maybe she was just listening differently. She looked around. No tools, no reason to stop. She walked into the kitchen and opened a drawer. Found a knife. Not large, but sharp enough. She returned to the wall, stood in front of it for a moment longer, then pressed the tip of the blade into the seam. The wallpaper gave with a soft tear. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. She paused, listened, nothing, just the same stillness. She continued, slowly peeling the paper back. It came away easier than expected. The glue had dried out over time. The edges curled as she pulled. Underneath, a panel. Not part of the original wall. A separate piece. Fitted in. Carefully. Marlene ran her fingers along the edges. There was no handle, no visible latch, just the outline. She pressed against it. Nothing. Then tried again. Harder. A soft click. Barely audible. The panel shifted inward. Just enough. Marlene stepped back instinctively. Her heart beat once, harder than before, then again. Steady. She reached forward and pulled. The panel opened slowly, revealing a narrow space behind it. Not deep, but intentional. A cavity built into the wall. Hidden. Sealed. Waiting. The air inside was cooler. Still. Untouched. Marlene leaned in slightly. Her eyes adjusted. There was something inside, wrapped in cloth, carefully folded. She hesitated, just for a second, then reached in and lifted it out. The cloth was thick, oil-stained, protected. She carried it to the table and set it down gently. Her hands moved slower now, more deliberate. She unfolded the first layer, then the second. Inside, papers. Old. Yellowed at the edges, stacked neatly. Beneath them, a small cassette tape, and beside it, a metal locket, simple, round, worn smooth with age. Marlene stared at the items. Her mind didn't rush, didn't jump ahead. It stayed right there, in the moment. She picked up the locket first, held it between her fingers. It was cold, heavier than it looked. She turned it over. No engraving, just the faint marks of time. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she set it back down, carefully. Then reached for the papers. Unfolded the top sheet. Handwritten. Ink faded, but still legible. Her eyes moved across the first few lines. Slowly, taking in each word. Her breathing changed. Not faster, deeper. As if her body understood before her mind did. She placed the paper back down, then looked at the cassette tape. Small, ordinary, but out of place. This wasn't something that had been forgotten. This had been hidden, protected, saved, for someone. Marlene leaned back slightly in her chair. The room felt different now. Not empty, not paused. Full. Of something that had been waiting to be found. She glanced toward the open panel in the wall, still ajar, still revealing that narrow space. A space that shouldn't have been there. A space that had been built for a reason. She stood slowly, walked back to it, looked inside again. Nothing else, just the empty cavity. She reached out and touched the inner surface, smooth, deliberate. This hadn't been an accident. This had been planned. She stepped back and closed the panel. It clicked softly into place. The seam disappeared almost entirely, just like before, just another part of the wall. Unless you knew where to look. Marlene turned back to the table. The items lay exactly where she had left them. Letters, tape, locket. She didn't touch them again. Not yet. Instead, she stood there, looking down at them, understanding one thing clearly. Whatever had been erased from the outside world had been preserved here. Inside the walls. Waiting. Not to be remembered, but to be discovered. Marlene sat at the kitchen table until the light outside the windows disappeared. She didn't move the papers, didn't open the locket, didn't press play on the cassette. Not yet. The items in front of her carried a weight that had nothing to do with how much they physically weighed. She had spent enough years working with old fabrics to understand that some things became fragile with time. Not because they were weak. Because they had survived, and the wrong hands could damage what they had protected for decades. So she waited. She made tea, She washed the cup afterward. She walked through the house once more, turning on each light even though some barely worked. Then she returned to the kitchen. The cassette was still there, waiting. Marlene looked at it. A small plastic rectangle, something ordinary, something that would have meant nothing to anyone who didn't know where it came from. She picked it up carefully. On the side, written in faded blue ink, was a date. October 1972. No name, no explanation, just a date. She turned it over. Nothing else. The house was silent around her. Marlene placed the cassette down. Tomorrow, she would find a way to listen. The next morning, she drove into town before the stores opened fully. She found an old electronics shop near the edge of Main Street. The sign above the door was faded, but the windows were clean. Inside, shelves held radios, record players, old cameras, and things people had stopped using but couldn't quite throw away. A man behind the counter looked up. Morning. I need a cassette player, Marlene said. The man glanced toward the shelves. Most people don't ask for those anymore. I know. Something about the way she answered made him stop. He didn't ask why. He simply walked to the back and returned with a small portable player. Still works, he said. Marlene paid. Then she left. Back at the house, she placed the cassette player on the kitchen table. For a moment, she just stared at it. The same feeling returned. The feeling from the wall, from the hidden space, from the first time she saw the frozen calendar. Something had happened here. Something someone had tried very hard to keep from being known. She inserted the cassette, pressed play. At first, nothing. Only static. A low, uneven hiss filling the kitchen. Marlene almost thought it wouldn't work. Then she heard it. A breath. A small movement. And finally, a woman's voice. Quiet. Tired, but clear. If someone is hearing this... The voice stopped. A long pause followed. Marlene sat completely still. I don't know when this will be found. Another pause. I don't know if anyone will ever believe us. The voice belonged to someone trying very hard not to cry. But she wasn't crying. She was recording, leaving something behind. My name is Clara Halbrook. Marlene's hand tightened slightly around the edge of the table. The name, the family, the records. All connected now. I made this because my husband says we need proof. He says if something happens, people need to know what really happened here. A faint noise came through the tape. A chair moving. A door closing. Clara continued. They came again yesterday. Marlene leaned closer. They said we had no choice. They said everyone eventually gives in. The tape crackled. The land company wants this property. They've wanted it for months. Marlene looked toward the wall, the hidden space, the place where the tape had waited. They offered money first, Clara said. Her voice lowered. Then they stopped offering. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closer. They told us people would stop helping us. They told us nobody in town would stand against them. Marlene listened without moving. The woman's voice continued. My husband refuses to sign. He says this house belonged to his father. He says we have a right to stay. A pause, then quieter. I'm afraid he's right. The tape clicked softly, then continued. They know when we leave. They know when our son walks home from school. They know too much. Marlene looked toward the hallway, toward the child's room, the untouched shoes, the small bed, the things left behind. The tape continued. If anyone finds this, please understand something. Clara's voice shook slightly. We didn't leave. Silence. A long one. Then, we were made to disappear. The tape kept running, but Marlene barely heard the rest. Those words stayed, not because they were dramatic, because they were simple. A person had recorded them knowing there might not be another chance. After the tape ended, Marlene remained seated. The player clicked. The reels stopped turning. The kitchen returned to silence. But it was not the same silence. She reached for the letters. This time she opened them. The handwriting matched the voice. Clara. Dates, notes, names, details. Marlene read slowly. She compared the letters with the recording. The same events. The same fear. The same pressure. One document mentioned meetings at the county office. Another mentioned signatures that were presented as agreements. But Clara wrote that her husband never willingly accepted the deal. Marlene placed each page beside the next. Dates, locations, names, patterns, the same way she had compared seams in fabric, finding where something didn't belong. And the more she looked, the clearer it became. The Halbrook family had not vanished. They had been pushed out of sight. Late that afternoon, Marlene opened the locket. Inside was a small photograph. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, smiling at the camera. Behind the picture, barely visible, was a name. Elise. Marlene closed the locket, set it beside the letters, then she opened her notebook. She wrote carefully. Halbrook family. Not abandoned. Not missing. Hidden. She stared at the word for a long time, then added one more line. Find what happened after they left. She closed the notebook. Outside, evening settled over County Road 12. The house looked the same from the outside. Same faded walls, same quiet yard, same windows facing the road. But Marlene knew now. This house had never been empty. It had been holding a story. A story someone hoped would never be heard. And now, after 51 years of silence, someone finally had. Marlene didn't feel victorious. That surprised her. She had expected anger, maybe even relief. But sitting alone at the kitchen table with Clara Halbrook's words still echoing in her mind, she felt something else. Responsibility. The kind that settles quietly. The kind that doesn't ask whether you want to carry it. The documents were spread across the table. The letters, the notes, the photograph, the locket. Everything arranged in careful rows. Marlene had spent most of her life making order out of things that were scattered. Fabric pieces. Measurements. Patterns. Now she was doing the same thing with the family's missing years. She picked up the first letter again. October 1972. She read it slowly. Then the next. Then the next. She marked dates in her notebook. Not because she wanted to build a story, because she wanted to know the truth. Stories could be changed. Records were harder to argue with. The next morning, Marlene drove back into town. This time, she wasn't looking for answers from people. She was looking for connections. The county records office was quieter than before. The same man sat behind the counter. He recognized her immediately. Back again? He asked. Marlene placed a folder on the counter. I need records from 1972 and 1973. The man looked at the folder, then at her. Something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Like he already knew what she was searching for. What exactly are you looking for? Property transfers, Marlene said. Company filings. Anything connected to the Halbrook property. He hesitated, then turned toward the computer. I'll see what I can find. Marlene watched him carefully. This time she noticed more. The pauses, the hesitation, the way he avoided saying certain names. She didn't push. She waited. Sometimes people revealed more when they weren't pressured. After several minutes, the man printed a few pages. Most of this is old. Marlene accepted the papers. Old didn't mean useless. She looked through them. Property records, company registrations, land purchases. Then she saw it. A name, a development company. One she had not noticed before. Halbrook property records showed no sale. But nearby parcels had changed hands during the same period. One company appeared repeatedly, a company that had purchased land throughout the area. She wrote the name down, then checked the dates. The same years, the same period when the Halbrooks disappeared from the records. She spent the next several days building the timeline herself. At the small desk in the dining room, she spread everything out. She created columns. Date, event. Name, document, connection. Her handwriting filled pages. The house became her office. The dining table became her investigation room. Morning light came through the windows and moved slowly across the papers as the day passed. She drank coffee that went cold before she finished it. Forgot meals, forgot the time. Not because she was obsessed, because every answer created another question, and every question led somewhere. She found the development company had changed names years later. Same address, different name, different paperwork, same people. Then she found a familiar name connected to the company records. A name she had heard before. The same name that appeared on a county board document. The same person whose family had owned nearby land. Marlene sat back. Read it again. Then once more. She didn't want to believe it too quickly. She had learned that assumptions could ruin good work. So she checked. And checked again. Dates matched. Names matched. Locations matched. The connection was real. That afternoon, she drove past the old town offices. Not to confront anyone, not yet. She simply wanted to see. The building was newer than the records she had been studying. Fresh paint. A clean sign. People walking in and out. Everything looked ordinary. That was the strange part. How ordinary things could look while carrying something hidden underneath. She stayed in the car for a few minutes, then drove away. Back at the house, Marlene returned to the dining room. The hidden panel in the wall remained closed, but she looked at it differently now. Not as a mystery, as evidence. She touched the edge of the wallpaper where she had cut it. A place that no one had noticed for 51 years. A place where someone had trusted that the right person would eventually come. She opened her notebook. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "The Halbrook family." Then below, what happened. Not what I think happened. The difference mattered. She underlined the words. That evening, she listened to Clara's recording again. Only once. She didn't need to hear everything twice. The voice was still there. The fear. The exhaustion. But also something else. A determination. Clara had known the tape might never be found. she had still made it. Marlene looked around the kitchen, at the old stove, the cabinets, the table, the room where someone had once sat and tried to preserve the truth. For the first time since buying the house, Marlene didn't feel like an outsider. Not because the house belonged to her, because she understood why it had waited. The following morning, she made copies. Every letter, every document, every note, she placed them carefully into separate folders. One for the county, one for herself, one sealed away, just in case. She was not a lawyer. She was not an investigator. She was not someone with power. But she knew how to pay attention, and she knew how to keep records. Sometimes that was where the truth began. Late in the afternoon, Marlene stood outside the house. The sun lowered behind the trees, turning the windows gold. The house looked peaceful, almost ordinary. But she knew what lived beneath that surface now. A family name, a missing chapter, a truth that had been waiting longer than anyone should have had to wait. She looked toward the road, toward the town that had spent decades saying nothing. Then she looked back at the house. The house was no longer just a cheap property bought for $300. It was a record. A witness. And Marlene Kade had finally understood something important. The hardest part was never finding the hidden truth. It was deciding what to do after you found it. She walked back inside, closed the door, and began preparing for what came next. 3 weeks later, Marlene Kade stood in the same kitchen where she had first unfolded Clara Halbrook's letters. The same table, the same fading light coming through the window. But everything felt different. On that morning, the house was no longer silent. Elise Halbrook stood near the doorway, holding the small metal locket in her hands. She was older now, no longer the child whose shoes had been left untouched upstairs. But Marlene could still see the little girl hidden inside the photograph, the girl who had once left a room behind without knowing if she would ever see it again. Marlene didn't give a speech. She didn't tell Elise what the house meant. She simply placed the old letters and the cassette tape into her hands and let the woman who had spent a lifetime without answers finally hold the pieces of her own beginning. Watching Elise walk through the rooms, touching the walls, stopping beneath the faded marks of a life that had been interrupted, Marlene understood something she never could have understood when she first arrived with a key and a $300 deed. She thought she was buying a forgotten house. But the house had been carrying someone else's unfinished story all along. And somehow, the thing that needed to be repaired was never the wood, the walls, or the broken places. It was the silence. For 51 years, a family secret had remained hidden because everyone looked away. Marlene was simply the person who decided to look closer. Maybe there is something in all of our lives that we leave untouched because we believe too much time has passed, or because we think the moment has already gone. But some things are not waiting to be changed. They are waiting to be found. What is the one thing you would finally open again if you knew the truth was still waiting inside?